Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, debt slave service peasants, vassals, auditors, accountants. I'm a useful idiot, and today I would like to talk about the Federal Reserve bailed out the world in 2008. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's some numbers that are circulating on the web and YouTube now that are actually about a year old. And these are figures about the Federal Reserve's emergency loans during the banking crisis. And as a result of the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, a limited audit of the Federal Reserve's emergency loans during the financial crisis was done. And in October of 2011, about a year ago, the Government Accounting Office released a report. And that's where these figures come from. And I'm not really sure why they're popping up on the web again, but they have reappeared. So I have decided that I'm going to go ahead and do this video, even though the material is a year old, because it has reappeared, and it's important enough that I think a lot of people should know this. And if anybody I can reach doesn't know this already, it's information worth having. And that is the fact that between December 1st, 2007 and July 21st, 2010, the bailouts were actually in the vicinity of $16 trillion. I've heard various figures from 16 to 24 to $32 trillion, but this is the official Government Accounting Office report covering that 3-year period, and it comes up with a figure of 16 trillion, which of course is immediately apparent that it's vastly different than the $700 billion TARP that Hank Paulson came to George Bush asking for in the bailout of the U.S. finance and banking system in 2008 when the economic crash happened. And these numbers are staggering. First of all, of course, the numbers are staggering in themselves. TARP was $700 billion, and yet in the secret loans the Federal Reserve gave out, J.P. Morgan alone got $400 billion. Goldman Sachs got $814 billion. So these numbers dwarf the actual known stated TARP bailout fund of $700 billion. And of course, the other thing that's notable by this report that came out was the fact that all of these foreign banks were bailed out by the U.S. Federal Reserve System. So good luck explaining that. So we have the entire banking system in the U.S. bailed out by U.S. taxpayers through the Federal Reserve, but as it turns out, taxpayers and the Federal Reserve bailed out the banking and finance system of the entire globe. And this list will bear that out. So of the $16 trillion, we have Citigroup got $2.5 trillion, Morgan Stanley got $2 trillion, Merrill Lynch got $2 trillion, Bank of America got $1.3 trillion, Barclays got $870 billion, Bear Stearns got $850 billion, Goldman Sachs got $814 billion, Royal Bank of Scotland got $540 billion, J.P. Morgan got $390 billion, Deutsche Bank got $350 billion, UBS got $290 billion, Credit Suisse got $260 billion, Lehman Brothers got $180 billion, Bank of Scotland got $150 billion, BNP Paribas in Spain got $175 billion, Wells Fargo got $160 billion, Dexia got $160 billion, Wachovia got $140 billion, Societe Generale got $125 billion, and all other borrowers after those ones got another $2.6 trillion. This is a massive, massive effort. And notable also that on this list of banks, of course, half of them are involved in drug cartel and terrorist money laundering. Half of them have actually been nationalized by the state or have collapsed. And, of course, all of them are involved in the LIBOR interest rate rigging scandal. So anyway, back to the main fact, and that is that the actual bailout of the finance system was not $700 billion just for the U.S. financial system. It was $16 trillion for banks worldwide supported by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. taxpayer. But let's not forget also that all these banks have been getting zero interest loans from the Federal Reserve. They park their reserves at the Federal Reserve and get interest. And they have every mechanism to get free money And they've been going back to the casino table of the world market, and these banks are still on shaky foundations. In spite of the profits that they're reporting, in spite of the gigantic bonuses, these banks are still on shaky legs. And this is true worldwide. So let's also remember, too, that the Federal Reserve bailed out all these foreign banks, and the ECB, the European Central Bank, also poured hundreds and hundreds of billions of euros and dollars into all those same banks in Europe a couple of times over in the last few years. So these banks have just been sucking up money like sponges, and yet they are still all teetering. What does that say about our financial system? And what does that say? That the Federal Reserve was used to bail out banks all over the globe, putting U.S. taxpayers at risk for not only the follies of our own financial asswipes, but also the ones in Europe. And let's name a few of those asswipes, by the way, because there's some very interesting conflicts of interest. Bernie Sanders looked into these reports, and he looked at some of these people involved, and he found out that 18 present and former members of the Federal Reserve Board made sure that banks that they had vested interest in were bailed out. So certainly a conflict of interest. So if you have all of these people serving on the Federal Reserve Board, serving at the Federal Reserve banks, and also serving on the boards of all these major banks and corporations that are bailing out, what do you think is going to happen? So a good example, Stephen Friedman, chairman of the New York Fed, who also sat on the Goldman Sachs board of directors and owned substantial amounts of Goldman Sachs stock, which is something that the Federal Reserve rules actually prohibit. So not only did he get to keep his Goldman Sachs stock, he continued to buy Goldman Sachs stock through 2008 and 2009. Then we have Jeffrey Immelt from GE, Obama's good buddy. So the Fed worked with GE to set up a commercial paper funding facility, and then the Federal Reserve later gave GE $16 billion in bailout funds. And incidentally, Jeffrey Immelt serves on the Federal Reserve Board. Then we have Jamie Dimon. His bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, received $390 billion in bailout money, and the Federal Reserve even gave him $29 billion to finance the acquisition of Bear Stearns, and was also nice enough to take all the toxic mortgage securities out of Bear Stearns and stick them to the U.S. taxpayer so that J.P. Morgan wouldn't have to take the losses. And, by the way, Jamie Dimon is also on the board of the Federal Reserve. And then you have William Dudley. I've mentioned him before because here he is, the head of the president of the New York Fed. He's supposed to be serving as oversight over the major banks on Wall Street, including J.P. Morgan. Yet his wife is still on the payroll, J.P. Morgan, and receives $180,000 a year. So a little bit of conflict of interest there. But William Dudley, New York Fed president now, he got to keep investments in AIG and GE while he was overseeing their bailouts as well. And the Fed didn't make him sell his holdings, as it would have appeared as a conflict of interest. No shit. So anyway, so the Federal Reserve is hardly independent in spite of its claims. And we see all this cronyism and the international bank cartel thriving within the Federal Reserve System as well as all the major banks. And as we can see, the $700 billion TARP was just a cover for a massive infusion of taxpayer money into a collapsing world financial system. And that is the bottom line. So once again, there is a numbers floating around of the true costs incurred for the bailouts. And this is from a GAO report, Government Accounting Office report from October of 2011. And these figures are making the rounds again, so I wanted to address this. And once again, people that don't know this, they need to know this, that the bailout was not $700 billion in the TARP program. It was a vast array of financing and re-liquidation plans and mechanisms that totals at least $16 trillion. And that isn't even the whole picture. So anyway, I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.